last week I was able to attend the Flourish retreat in Florida. And Flourish it's a pastors and spouses retreat put on by the Ivana network of churches. And so it's I know that some of you are a little bit familiar with Ivana. That doesn't It's not really the point. It was a pastor retreat, and I've been to it. The first year I went, um, I wasn't sure about going. They had invited me to come. A couple people on the Ivana network had invited me to come, and I'm like, it's a pastor's retreat, and I'm not a pastor. I said, I just fill the pulpit. I'm more of a preacher than a pastor. And they said, Kurt, it would be really good if you could come. And so I finally bit the bullet and went, and I've been going back. This, I think, was the fourth year that Dawn and I have been able to go. And it's a neat time because for this pastor's retreat, it's about 4 days long. So we'll start out in the morning with breakfast because that always makes the day great. And then we go from there into a worship service that lasts about an hour and a half. During that time, the first half hour to 45 minutes probably is spent in music and worship. They'll have a praise band with the drums and a keyboard and instruments I probably couldn't recognize and definitely can't play. But they'll lead us in a time of worship, and then after that there'll be a time of teaching or preaching. So that service lasts about an hour and a half. After that, there's a short break, and then there's breakout sessions. And so these breakout sessions, everybody that's there can choose which track they want to go on. Then we have lunch, and then we have nothing. Nothing. And it's just a time for some downtime. And so when Dawn is there with me, it's great. We were able to go to the beach one afternoon, walk along the beach. Um, I see a bunch of people at this beach are out right at the edge of the water. They're looking for stuff. I finally asked the guys, what's everybody looking for? I said, shark's teeth. Okay. What do they look like? I mean, I'm from Iowa, right? We don't have an abundance of shark's teeth as far as I know. So he showed me some. And so then we joined him. We're walking along. And I told Don, I said, I got to find at least one, don't I? So I did. I found a shark's tooth. And then there was a little boy there with his little Ziploc bag of them. And I'm like, hey, you want another one? Yeah. I don't know what people do with shark's teeth, but they were having fun. Another afternoon, Dawn and I did some hiking to nature preserve. Um, we did some resting. One afternoon, I got in a kayak and went out and kayaked a little bit. And I was also trying to figure out what in the world was I supposed to preach about this week. Um, and so I didn't really know. I didn't really know. And it was on Tuesday. We were on our way back. We had left early. We flew out of Tampa, and Florida, a mile's not a minute down there. Like, my parents lived about 14 miles away from this conference center, and it's about a 35 to 50-minute drive to get there. And I'd look at the map and say, well, that's not very far. And it's far. So we flew into Tampa, and I think Tampa was maybe 40 miles, but it's like a 2-hour drive. And so we'd plowed plenty of time, and we got up to Tampa. We had plenty of time. We said, let's get something to eat before our flight. So we went to Olive Garden. We're we're sitting there in Olive Garden. I am enjoying my garlic bread, and I get this text right from Cindy. It says, "Checking in, Kurt. See if you have anything for Sunday's message, scripture or title." And I had nothing. And so I was very honest with her, and this was my reply. I said, "Nope. Been a mental roadblock so far. Coming home from Florida today. Hopefully God gives me some direction. Or if you have a suggestion, maybe he'll give us something through you." See, nothing like putting a little pressure on. And so I'm continuing to munch on my breadsticks and on my meal. And Cindy had a couple ideas for, a couple possibilities. And then she hit me up with this. She says, it just hit me. Maybe you were at the Ivana conference. Now I looked at that, and I look at it now and I'm like, that was just kind of like an observation. You were at the Ivana conference. But I had been wondering, could I do some sort of a summary on some of this? And then when she said that, I'm like, that's how I took it. It's like, maybe you should give us a summary of what you've got there. And so whether Cindy meant that or not, that's what you're getting this morning. It's not a lot of rhyme or reason, but that's okay. We're just going to go over some of the things that I had learned at this conference on being shaped by Jesus. So the breakout session, the breakout track that I decided to do was on preaching. I looked at the different tracks, and some of them were more like a counseling bend or in depth on something else, and I thought they didn't pertain to me as much. So I took this one on teaching, and I learned something. I wish some of the younger guys were still in the service this morning. I was going to pick on them because they said that our average attention span is in minutes equal to our age. So a 2-year-old has an attention span of approximately 2 minutes. And an 8-year-old would have an attention span of approximately 8 minutes. But here's the kicker. It maxes out at 10. And so these guys that were up here in this front row, their attention span is about the same as the rest of you because it doesn't go above 10 minutes. Our attention spans basically max out no matter how old we are, whether we're 25, 45, 65, 95, our attention spans are basically 10 minutes. And actually that seems to be coming down now with phones and with all the media we get. A lot of people think it's closer to maxing out at 7 minutes. And so what do we do with that? It means that when I'm preaching, every 10 minutes, I got to mix something up. I have to have a joke. I have to have a change of pace. I have to do something to kind of get everybody back together. Either that or I just quit preaching after 10 minutes, which is an alternative, I guess, right? But this morning, we're going to dig into a couple of the passages that we did at Ivana. And so I'm going to go back to this one that I just read. And I'm going to read through here one more time. Mark chapter 8, verses 22 to 26 says, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. Took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. And when he had spit on the man's eyes, he put his hands on him and asked, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the blind man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, don't even go into the village. Now, that is probably one of my favorite miracles. But it's a strange one because it's like, did Jesus fail the first time? Right? We don't have any other account where it took Jesus 2 tries to get it right. Here's this guy that comes, and the guy he doesn't have any conversation. Someone brings him. He doesn't ask to be healed in this account. It's those that are with him are asking that he get healed. And then normally, or oftentimes at least, when Jesus heals someone, he does it immediately. Right? They come, he heals. They come, they heal. Not this guy. This guy, he takes him and he leads him outside the village. The blind guy stumbling over the roots and the rocks on the trail. Right? Jesus taking him before Jesus does any healing. And then Jesus spits in the guy's eyes. Right? He can't see it coming because he's blind. He's there with his eyes, and all of a sudden something hits him in the eye. And if you're like, what do you do when you get something in your eye? You're like blinking, you rub it, you try to get it out. And I imagine this guy doing that. And as he's blinking, he's starting to see some things. He's starting to see something, starting to get some light. And it's like, wow. And Jesus asked him, do you see anything? And the man replies, I see people, they look like trees. Now, isn't it interesting? He could have said yes. He could have said yes, but he didn't. It's like he wanted more. It's like, there's more to this. And so he says, I see people, they look like trees walking around. Now, how did he even know what they looked like? If he'd been blind, maybe he wasn't blind from death. Maybe he lost his sight somewhere, but he was blind from death. How does he know what a tree looks like or what a person looks like? Right? It's just kind of, I love this. But then Jesus touched him again, put his eyes on him, and it says his eyes were open and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. The first time, the first stage of his healing, he saw people walking around, but they looked like trees. They looked like objects. The second time Jesus touched him, he saw clearly. began to see with his heart, and he saw individuals made in the image of God. How often do people look like trees to us? They look like objects, just another thing, not as individuals made in God's image. Coming home from Florida, I saw a whole lot of people that look like trees. I saw thousands of people in the airport. I might have noticed their hairstyle. I might have noticed their clothes, the way they walked, or how much luggage they had, but I didn't see them as people. I didn't see them as individuals. Maybe one, maybe there was one. We're going through security at Tampa. There's a long line like there always is at security. And I've decided I must have muscles of steel. I know you guys don't see that, but apparently they do with those machines that you go through, because anytime I go through them, they got to pat me down. And I think the guys there are just like, man, I've never seen a guy with this many muscles. I got to check him out. Because every time I go through, they're like, wait here. Okay, stand over here, spread out. And we got to check you out every time. So that didn't happen in Tampa, which makes me really question their security there, right? If a man with all the steel that I have in my body could just walk through the machines, you might not want to fly through Tampa. But here was all these people for all different flights, right? Because this is just to get in. And so as I do, I start talking to the guy that was behind me, and I'm like, I can't believe I got through there without getting patted down. He goes, that's not normally my problem. He goes, but they always want to go through my bag. And as the bags came out of the x-ray machine, they had this divider that would separate them two ways. And so the bags that you could just claim, or the bags that they were going to go through. And so we're standing there waiting, and it was a slow process. And I'm like, well, why is that? And he goes, well, he says, when I travel, I always have a Ziploc bag with some laundry detergent in it. And they always want to know what that white powder is. And so we're standing there, and sure enough, his bag gets separated off. Mine comes through. I grab it. I'm going to go get my belt on before my pants fall down, and finish getting dressed here, because you got to take all that stuff off to go through the machine. So I did. So I had this little bit of glimpse of another person. Right? Saw him a little bit as a person. So we got onto our flight. We flew. We had to change planes in Charlotte. We get to Charlotte, and I'm starting to get hungry again, because Olive Garden was a long time ago. And so, you look around, there's a ton of places to eat in the Charlotte airport, and hardly any of them had lines. And it's always like, the longer the line, probably the better the food, right? And as I look, there's one that has a huge line, and it's Chick-fil-A. I'm like to Dawn, I said, should we go get some Chick-fil-A? She goes, yeah, let's do that. And so we go and we get in line at Chick-fil-A, and we're waiting. And all of a sudden, I hear this voice behind me that says, we meet again. And I turn around, and it was the same guy that had the laundry detergent in his bag. And I'm like, well, hi. I said, so where are you heading? He goes, I'm going to Virginia. And I said, well, what took you to Florida? Turns out he was a pilot. He's a corporate pilot. He had gone to pick up a plane that they were working on in Florida, and it wasn't ready for him to fly home. So he had to go back home. He was going to wait, and he was actually going to go back on Friday. He says, what took you to Florida? And I said, oh, we were at a pastor's retreat. And he goes, oh, that's great. He said, on my way down here, two of my pastors were sitting in the seats right in front of me on the plane. He said, they were heading to the Caribbean. They're checking out a service project for us to go on. So we began to talk some more. I said, well, where in Virginia are you from? He said, Virginia Beach. He said, oh, that's where I went to seminary. He goes, you did? What school? I said, Regent. He goes, I know a lot of the professors at Regent. He goes, they're good friends of mine. We talked more. He goes, my daughter, she's trying to decide if she wants to go to Regent or if she wants to go to Liberty. And so we were having this conversation, and I was able to see him as a person. All these other people around, the thousands of people in the airport, they were trees, right? They were objects. I didn't know what burdens they were carrying. I didn't know what they were dealing with. And honestly, I didn't care. But this one man that I met, we had some conversation, and I began to see a little bit about him. Like the blind man from Bethsaida, I began to see a little bit with my heart in addition to my eyes. at the Flourish retreat was talking with a pastor whose church is trying to do that as well. It's a church in a mid-sized city. It's right downtown. I think it's between 100 and 200 people, so not real big, not real small. And they decided that they were going to invite people from the local jail to come to their church. Now, I don't know what they had to do that, but the first Sunday they did this, 4 people showed up from jail. 4 guys, they're wearing ankle monitors. They come, that's great, right? That's a great outreach. And there was some paperwork they had to do because it was kind of like a work release thing, where you had to fill out paperwork for them. So it was great. It was a great, and they were seeing these guys as people, not just as some guys off in jail. The challenge became a few weeks later when word about this got out, and 70 inmates showed up for church. 70 guys are now coming, wearing their ankle monitors with their stacks of paperwork. They had to get a whole team of volunteers just to fill out the paperwork for these guys every Sunday. Right? Imagine what that, because you got to check them in, you got to check them out. And then there's other challenges. There's challenges with, do we need to do something different with our kids ministry and our security? And then there's one that nobody thought of. Apparently, jail food's not very good. And so these guys have they're not stupid, right? People in jail aren't stupid. They're like, you know what? If we're out, we could have Uber Eats deliver us some food at the church. Wouldn't that be nice? We can get a good meal before we go back to our cells. And so now the church is trying to figure out, how do we navigate that when you have 4 or 5 or 10 Uber Eats vehicles pull up during the church service to deliver food to people in your service? But that is part of the process of learning to see people as people, not as trees. It's to see people, not to see trees pain. And I had to ask myself, what am I willing to give up to spread the gospel? Right? Would I be willing to come to church an hour early to fill out paperwork so that somebody else could attend? Would I be willing to sit and worship with someone who is from a totally different background, who has done things that cross lines that I would never consider doing? Could I come and worship with someone who has maybe victimized me? Maybe I've been the victim of their crime. Or how would it affect my worship if there were people coming who the real reason they were coming was to get out and be able to stretch their legs and get a fresh meal? What would that do to me? And I challenge you with the same questions I've been struggling with. It's like, how badly do we want to reach other people with the gospel? Because whether we see people as trees moving around or whether we see people as individuals made in the image of God will have a lot to do with how we answer that question. But Jesus does not see people as trees. So that was kind of this one sermon part that we did on shaped by the sight of Jesus, the blind man at Bethsaida. Then we had another one shaped by the sound of Jesus that further brought it home. This one was about Mary Magdalene, and it's taken from John. If you remember, Mary Magdalene, she wasn't the most reputable woman. She was not the woman that you would want your son to bring home on a date and say, I want to date this woman. I want to marry this woman, right? But Mary Magdalene was the first woman, the first person that Jesus appeared to after he rose from the grave. And so that's what this account is here. John chapter 20, starting in verse 15, it says, this is in the garden where Jesus was buried. She's at the grave. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I'll get him." Jesus said to her, Mary. And she turned toward him and cried out in Arabic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, do not hold on to me, for I have yet to ascend to my Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. And she told them all these things he had said to her. See, there's three stages here in Mary's response to Jesus. Because in the first stage, she saw him but didn't recognize him. He even talked to her. He says, woman. And when he does, she begins to tune up a little bit. Kind of like the old radios. Some of you remember them, some of you guys don't. But old radios that had tubes in them. It took them a while to warm up. They had that little glow. And you had to adjust the knobs on the dial. And so she began to tune up a little bit when he said, woman, who are you looking for? But then as he was talking, she didn't recognize him. And then he called her by name. He said, Mary. And immediately she tuned in, right? She was focused. She connected all the dots. She realized who he was. She calls out, teacher, Rabboni. And then when she had tuned in, when she had given her full attention to Jesus, he gave her instructions. Go tell the others. That's your assignment. Go tell the others. And so she did. She kind of tuned out, not tuning him out. She turned outward. She began to broadcast what Jesus had said. She went and told others this good news. I have seen the Lord. And that's really a progression that all of us go through. Jesus talks to us and we don't understand who he is. We don't recognize him. We hear this voice, it's talking to us. We know it's talking to us, but we haven't pieced it together. And then all of a sudden, the light bulb goes off in our head, and we get it. And we realize that he is who he says he is. And what happens after we have truly tuned in? We obey. We tune out, we broadcast, we tell others. But in order to get to that point, Mary had to go through some trials. Right? And there's not a much bigger trial than losing someone that you love. James 1, 2, and 3. It says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, because you know that testing of your faith produces perseverance. The trials in the end make us better, but it's not an enjoyable process. One of our speakers used the analogy of a glass blower. Now, when I was young, I had a great uncle who was a master glass blower. I don't know if that's an actual title or not, but he was a master. He had worked in the 1940s. He worked at Dow Chemical making test tubes for them. That was his occupation, was making things out of glass, test tubes and beakers. He decided to go into business for himself, but until he died, Dow Chemical continued to bring him their biggest and their most difficult projects because they had nobody on site that could blow glass like he could. So as a kid, I loved to go visit him, loved to visit his shop, little torches, and he would ask us for a coin, for a penny. I never had one, but like the kids this morning, I would go and beg one off somebody, and I would take him a penny, and he would proceed to make a glass jar around the penny that you couldn't get the penny out of. It was a jar with a little tiny neck. There was a hole, but the hole was about the size of a pencil letter, just slightly bigger. There was no way you could get the penny out of that, but he made a glass jar that fit around the penny. That's what he would do for the kids that would come in. Or he would take a piece of glass tubing and he would put it in the fire and he would get it hot and he would make drinking straws for us. He would blow a bubble in the middle of it. And so when you would go and drink your milk, the milk would come up and then it would fill up this bubble and then you could get it into your mouth. Or he would take it and he would tie it in a knot. And as you would drink your milk or your Kool-Aid or whatever you had, it would come up and it would swirl through this knot before you would finally get it in your mouth. It was great fun to go visit my Uncle Willard. And the man was a master of what he did. But he had to use heat and he had to use fire. I mean, One of what I considered his masterpieces, I don't know if he did, he would make windmills, like the Iowa farm windmills, right? With this trellis-like structure going up, and on top of it was, I don't even know what parts of a windmill are called. There's the blades, but then there's, like a weather vane sort of thing. That was all out of glass, and it all moved. And in fact, he would get it balanced to the point that the windmill could spin if you would blow on it. But that's not where he stopped. Then he would make the linkage that would go down in the middle, and he would make a glass pump. He would make a glass ball and a little ball valves. And as that windmill would turn, that pump would go. There was a bowl at the bottom of it you could put water in. And if you would blow or put a blow dryer on that windmill, it would pump water. And this whole thing was glass. There was nothing but glass in it. It would pump water up into a trough that would run around and back into the holding tank. All out of glass. But all of that had to be heated. He couldn't do it without a bunch of heat. Get it too hot, you're going to burn the glass. Get it just right, you can form it. Don't get it hot enough, and it's going to shatter. Sometimes in our lives, God needs to get us in enough heat that he can form us to be what he wants us to be. And it's not a fun process, but it turns out to be something beautiful. And so after hearing a sermon on being shaped by the sight of Jesus, and after a sermon on being shaped by the sound of Jesus, we got another one, shaped by the touch of Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 9, we have the account of Jesus and the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years and the 12-year-old girl who died. Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 18, it says, "While he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, 'My daughter has just died. Come and put your hand on her and she will live.' And Jesus got up and went with him. And so did the disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, 'If only I touch him, I'll be healed.' Jesus turned and saw her. 'Take heart, daughter,' he said. 'Your faith has healed you.' And at that moment, the woman was healed. And Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and the people playing pipes. He said, 'Go away. The little girl's not dead, but asleep.' But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through the entire region." Notice the touch in this account. We have this woman, right? We don't know her name. We don't know who she was. All we know is her desperation. This account in Luke, it says she had spent all that she had trying to be healed, going to doctors. She had spent 12 years of being unclean. Everywhere she went, everything she touched, unclean. She had to feel like an outcast, unworthy to talk to Jesus, unworthy of even asking for healing. And yet, she reached out to touch his coat. And how did he respond? He called her daughter. She went from bleeding to healed. She went from unclean to clean. She went from outcast to child of the King in one touch. And Jesus continued from there, and he went to the synagogue leader's house where he took the hand. He touched and took the hand of this young girl and gave her life. And in the process, he redefined death. But in both of these instances, Jesus should have become unclean, right? If somebody unclean touched you, you became unclean. If you touched a dead person, you were definitely unclean, automatic, no question about it, unclean and excluded for a certain period of time. But Jesus was different because Jesus does not become unclean. Instead, what he touches becomes clean. Yeah, that's a difficult concept for us. If you put on clean boots, if you sanitize your boots, put on clean boots, and walk to a hog confinement building, the boots get dirty, the building doesn't get clean. Being clean and walking through a hog confinement building doesn't clean the building. If you have some poison and some food, if the poison gets on the food's not going to be eaten. Right? It becomes unclean, unsafe. If you're grilling and you have a piece of raw meat on your plate and you're going out to the grill, you don't use that plate then for something else. You wash that plate because the plate is unclean. Putting contaminated meat on a clean plate doesn't make the plate clean. But with Jesus, what he touches becomes clean. When he touches us, we become clean, cleansed by the power of his blood. We had an opportunity at the Ivana conference to experience some of that. There was a session of worship that was going on, and it was one of those times when you could just feel the Holy Spirit being present. The air was thick. You could just sense it. One of those times that you're in and you're just kind of in awe. And one of the leaders used this analogy. They said, it feels like we are in the temple of God and his train is filling the temple. His robe is filling the temple. She goes, anyone who says, we can all reach out and touch it. We get the healing. And she said, they had a stage kind of like this. They said, it's like that stage is the altar. And she said, if anybody wants to lay their burdens on the altar, if anyone wants to go and worship at the altar, you are welcome to do that. And people did. I'm guessing over half of the people there were probably 150 or 200 people, somewhere in that, at this conference. Over half of the people were immediately out of their chairs and on their knees up front. There was crying, there were tears, there was rejoicing, there was celebration, you name it, as people were laying their burdens out for God. They were being released. It was an experience that we don't get to experience very often. It was one of those services that no one wanted to end, and so it didn't end very quickly, which messed up the schedule for the whole rest of the day and actually the following days, because the guy that was supposed to speak that day never got an opportunity to, and it was great. It was great. So I am so thankful that I was able to be there, not just for that service, but actually for this whole weekend, long weekend retreat, because I was so encouraged and I was so challenged. And my hope this morning is that you also are encouraged and that you also are challenged. You are challenged like the blind man to be shaped by the sight of Jesus, to see people as people made in the images of God and not just as trees moving around. And I hope you are challenged like Mary by the sound of Jesus' voice. You were challenged to tune up, to get on the same wavelength and tune in to what he is saying, and then to tune out and broadcast that where he tells you. And I hope that you are challenged like the bleeding woman and the 12-year-old girl who were touched by Jesus, can make all things clean and redefine death. And this week, when things get tough, and they will, I challenge you to remember that glass cannot be formed without getting it hot. It has to be heated. And when it does, those trials that you encounter, they're forming you into something more beautiful than you can ever imagine. Would you bow in prayer with me? Lord God, we love you. And Lord, if we're honest, we do not like the trials. We do not like the troubles that we go through. But Lord, we are so excited to see what you are going to do with us. We are so excited to experience the beauty that you are creating through the things that you bring us through. Lord, this morning I just ask that you would help us to be shaped by the sight and the sound and your touch. that we can be more like you, that we can, uh, yeah, just be more like you, God, the beauty that you are, that we can then reflect that and show that to those around us in our community, here in Westchester, Washington County, and the other places we go, that your kingdom can grow, people can see you. We ask this in the wonderful name of Jesus. Amen.